Let's talk some chess. The name of this game speaks for itself. It's known to chess history as the Evergreen Game because its beauty will last forever, I think is the idea. It was played in 1852 between Adolf Anderssen and Jean Dufresne. Anderssen was considered the best player in the world at the time, and Dufresne was his student. So this is a nice student-teacher game, and one of the coolest games ever to be played out on the board. I think Agenmator calls it the prettiest or most beautiful game he's ever seen. So let's get right into it. We have e4 by Anderssen, e5 by Dufresne, knight to f3, attacking this pawn on e5, and knight to c6 defending this pawn. So very normal stuff, even all the way back in 1852. Bishop to c4 by Anderssen, bishop to c5, and now probably a move you weren't expecting to see in the Evergreen Game, b4, which is known as the Evans Gambit. The pawn is obviously attacking the bishop, but there's nothing saying that you cannot capture the pawn back, and that is what Dufresne does. Dufresne takes the pawn on b4 with the bishop, but now you get the central idea behind the Evans Gambit. c3, attacking the bishop and forcing it away from the square, and after the bishop retreats, d4, expanding in the center. So essentially, you give up a pawn, but now you have this nice sort of central pawn structure. The dark squared bishop has a lot of room to develop. You can castle kingside, and this is the idea behind the not so commonly played today Evans Gambit. Here we have e takes on d4 by Dufresne, and the most common move for white in this position, or at least the move that the engine recommends, is queen to b3, setting up a battery between the queen and the bishop, eyeing this f7 square, f7 pawn, I'm sorry. And then you have to address this threat, and here black can play queen to f6, defending the pawn. And then white can just castle kingside. This was very similar to what happened, but just in a slightly different order. Here, Anderssen actually just castled kingside right away. Getting out of this pin, the pawn on c3 is pinned to the king from the bishop, so castling and getting the king to safety. And now Dufresne actually pushes the pawn to d3, creating a passed pawn. That's obviously really cramping Anderssen's style here on the third rank. Now we have queen to b3 by Anderssen, the idea we saw before, doubling up on this f7 pawn, and Dufresne protects it just like we saw before with queen to f6, now protecting this pawn from the bishop and queen. Now we have e5 here by Anderssen. This is a nice move. You're attacking the queen, of course. The queen cannot capture back because the knight is defending. And you do have this knight captures on e5, but this doesn't look very good after rook to e1, pinning the knight to the king, and now the knight is attacked by both the rook and the white knight. So this doesn't look like a very good idea, and Dufresne agrees and instead just moves the queen to g6, lining up with the enemy king, and perhaps more importantly, protecting the passed pawn on d3. So now Anderssen's bishop cannot take back because then queen takes bishop, and Dufresne is up even more material. So a nice sort of spot for the queen here on g6. Now we have e1 anyways by Anderssen, getting the rook on the semi-open file and lined up with the enemy king. And now knight g to e7 by Dufresne, connecting these two knights nicely, allowing the king to castle and sort of clogging up this e-file. And in this position, Dufresne actually has the better position. He has more pieces developed. The king can castle, he's up a bit of material, and he has this passed pawn, which is protected by the queen on g6. So this is totally fine for Dufresne. He just has to play his cards right and not succumb to the pressure of this queen and the bishop and the rook all mounting an attack. And Anderssen starts to build that pressure with bishop to a3, now getting these two bishops slicing powerfully across this diagonal. And we'll see in this game that king safety is a really big theme, as it is with many games that are famous because of great attacks. I think Dufresne didn't really want to castle here because he was worried about these two bishops and worried about this queen. I don't think we'll ever know unless he left notes of the game, but it looks like he's not very interested in castling here because of these long-range pieces eyeing the position. So instead here he plays b5, and this is a kind of an interesting move. We saw Anderssen give away a pawn on b4 as a part of the Evans Gambit, so Dufresne says I can do that too and plays b5 here. The queen captures the pawn because the pawn is undefended, but now you get this rook to b7 move, which obviously attacks the queen, and the rook is protected by the knight, so the queen cannot capture back. So the queen here has to go to a4, and what has been achieved for Dufresne? Well, he broke up the queen and bishop battery, eyeing the f7 square, and he gained the open b file for his rook. So lost a pawn for those two things. The engine doesn't like it, but we can certainly see why he did it. The engine in this position, instead of b5, actually prefers that you play d5, sort of blocking the path of this light squared bishop. Here, the correct move for Anderssen would be to take en passant. E takes d5, pawn, c takes d5, and now actually rook to e1 rook to e3 by Anderssen, preparing maybe to move the knight and double up on the e-file with the rooks. And here you can just castle with the black pieces. This bishop is a little bit less potent because of the pawn on d6, which is protected by the queen, so it can't be taken, and just play defense and play normally from here. That's the line that the engine prefers. But again, maybe Dufresne doesn't like the look of these bishops and instead wants to win the e-file for himself, so he goes for this b5 sacrifice, and now we have this nice maneuver. And now we have bishop to b6 by Dufresne, immediately closing down the e-file, which he just opened, so that's not so good. But he has a very nice bishop eyeing this f2 pawn, pinning the pawn to the king, and now both of these pawns are under duress because of the queen and the bishop, and there's pressure mounting against Anderssen's king, so something he has to be mindful of. Here, Anderssen plays knight b to d2, blocking this pawn on d3, connecting the two knights, developing the final piece, allowing this rook to get into the game. So just a nice move all around. And now we have bishop to b7 by Dufresne, developing his final minor piece, fianchettoing the bishop, and now if this knight moves, all of a sudden, Dufresne has a nice pair of bishops that are attacking the enemy king. So what's cool about this game is there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of pieces in space that are taking up a lot of important squares, and the attacks are going to come almost from nowhere. So keep your eyes peeled because a lot is going to materialize in just a couple of moves. Here we have knight to e4 by Anderssen, so a nice galloping of the knight to e4 now, and now this knight is starting to be a little bit threatening. It can eye this f6 square where it would deliver check. Obviously, there's a pawn protecting it, but we'll think about that as a potential move. And here Dufresne makes sort of another, maybe a larger mistake. He plays queen to f5. This is a sort of a strange move. It doesn't really achieve anything. I'm not totally sure what the idea is here. Maybe, I don't even know, maybe after the knight moves, the bishop is eyeing f3 along with the queen. I don't really know. Maybe he wants to get the rook here and then push the pawns. Doesn't make sense to me. The engine once again wants you to play d2 here. Not once again. The engine wants you to play d2 here, attacking this rook. And it looks like this actually gives up the knight, but after knight takes on d2, and then knight to d8, opening up the two bishops here, and the queen. This is a position much favored by the computer. It prefers this position for black, but instead we have this queen to f5 move, which doesn't really unleash this light squared bishop on b7. And Anderssen is happy here. He finally has a moment to capture the passed pawn on d3, which has been a little bit annoying, sort of cramping his development and obviously threatening to sort of push the pawn onwards. So he can finally capture it, and in addition to capturing it, he now has the bishop lined up with the queen. So if the knight moves away, let's say there's some silly move here like a6, then knight to d6, and this obviously is check, and the bishop is attacking the queen, and the queen will be lost. So it doesn't really make sense for Dufresne to have his queen on f5, and now he realizes that and has to move it away, of course, and plays queen to h5, now eyeing this h1 pawn, also keeping an eye on the knight on f3, but certainly not a very good sequence of moves for Dufresne's queen. Is there a line I wanted to show here? No, never mind. Okay, and here we have the first sort of really exciting move of the game from Anderssen. So pause for a moment and see if you can find this move to start the attack in excellent style while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, this is a tough one because you have to see a couple of moves ahead, which obviously is very important in chess. But to kick things off in spectacular fashion, here Anderssen played knight to f6 with check. So this knight was really building the tension up the board, and it reaches its culmination on f6, where it's checking the enemy king. This is a royal fork. It's forking the king, forking the queen. So you have to obviously do something about this. You can't just move the king because then you lose your queen. So the sacrifice must be accepted, and it is with pawn takes on f6. But what's important about this sacrifice is it allows Anderssen to open up the e-file by taking e takes on f6, and now the pawn on f6 is threatening this knight on e7, and the rook is now sitting on an open file, which is the most important thing of all. So this isn't, quite a knight sacrifice, because now this knight looks like it's in a lot of trouble. It's pinned from the rook. Sorry, what I meant to say is this knight to f6 move is not quite a knight sacrifice, because now this knight on e7 is in a lot of trouble. It's pinned by the rook to the king, it's attacked by the pawn, and it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to save. So here we have rook to g8 by Dufresne, and this is awesome because Dufresne is saying, I am not going to play defense. I have 2 bishops. Maybe this light squared bishop isn't fully operational yet, but I have 2 bishops. I have a queen. I have a rook. You know, you've managed to open up the E file. Well, I've managed to open up the G file. I'm going to attack your king, and I'm going to beat you to the punch. I'm going to checkmate you first. And we always get the most exciting games when that happens. So in this position, Anderssen actually plays the really, like, probably the best move of the game because there's a lot going on in this position. It's hard to sort of figure out what to do. He plays rook a to d1. And we're going to see the importance of this move later on, but it's a really awesome move because it doesn't appear to achieve anything just now. And it also ignores the fact that you have just a knight hanging on e7. So I think if I were in this position, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to take the knight with the pawn. But then you get knight takes back on e7, and now the bishops are operational. There's no real way to continue this attack. You have the rook eyeing the knight, and all of a sudden, you know, you're under a huge counterattack yourself. So, you know, kudos to Anderssen here for just playing this rook a to d1, although it's very hard to understand what's going on with this move, but we're going to see the idea behind it in just a couple of moves. And here Dufresne plays... also a very exciting move, plays queen to f3. Queen takes knight on f3, so picking up the knight. This pawn is obviously pinned to the king by the rook, so this you cannot take the queen back. And now Dufresne, of course, is threatening checkmate in 1 on g2. And Dufresne is saying, you know, what do you got? I'm going to put my queen here. I'm going to ignore your attack because I don't believe your attack is going to work. I don't believe you can checkmate me. And if you stop even for a second, I'm just going to play queen takes on g2, and that's going to be checkmate. So let's see what you got, and yeah, let's see what's going on. And Anderssen now jumps into it, and he knows that he has, I think what makes this game amazing is he knows he has no time. If he lets up for a second, then queen takes on g2 is checkmate. So every move has to count, and he kicks it off with rook takes on e7 with check. So obviously, basically every move has to be a check, otherwise you lose with checkmate. So now you get knight takes on e7 blocking. And now this is sort of the move that you had to see to go into this attack. So for the second, probably the last time, see if you can pause for a moment and find the move that Anderssen plays to continue this match and really send it into the annals of history as the Evergreen Game. Okay, so the pressure is on. You know pretty much that you have to play a check. That makes this, if this is a puzzle, that makes the puzzle a lot easier because you know there has to be a check, and why is that? If you play anything other than a check, then queen to g2 is going to be checkmate. You can't even play defense against this. You can't play g3 because then queen to g2 is checkmate anyways, because don't forget about this bishop on b7, which was just unleashed by the knight move. To capture the rook on e7. So now the bishop and the queen and the rook are all eyeing this g2 square. So there's really no way to defend against this queen to g2 mate. I guess you could play king to f1, but then this just is not going to go. I mean, yeah, this is going to go terribly. You can either put the queen on g1 with check, or if the king tries to run to e2, then this looks very, very bad as well. So, you can't really guard against checkmate. You can move the king away, but it's going to go badly and you're going to lose all your pieces. So you know that you have to play a check to stop Dufresne from delivering this just brutal attack. And the only check that you can play in this position is the very aggressive but sensational queen sacrifice, queen takes on d7 with check. And this is just an amazing, amazing sacrifice. And hopefully you can start to see the idea behind rook to d1 here, because really, you have no choice but to accept the sacrifice. If you move the king to f7, then either queen takes on e7 or, more stylishly, bishop takes on e7. These are both checkmate because the pawn is guarding the g7 square. So you have to accept the sacrifice. King takes queen on d7. But now the entire idea behind rook to d1 is clear because the bishop moves away with check. Bishop moves to f5 with check, and what's important is this is a double check. And this is just one of the beauties of this game. This bishop is attacked by the knight on f5, but you can't capture it because the rook is also delivering check from d1. And just as similarly, this queen not only can pick up the bishop on f5, it could pick up the rook on d1, and this would be checkmate. If it could capture the rook on d1, it would be checkmate for Dufresne, but you can't do that because both the rook and the bishop are checking the king. When it's double check, you have to move the king because you cannot capture or block both of these pieces with the same move. So the king has to move, and here, actually didn't do this other line, but king to c6 very much does not look good. I think this might actually be mate in one. Yeah, so king to d6, c6 you cannot play because then you get bishop to d7, and this is actually checkmate. The bishop is slicing this way, the dark squared bishop is slicing this way, the king is protecting the bishop, so you can't do that. So the king has to move to d8, and again, just want to acknowledge how cool it is that the knight and the queen can capture all of these pieces, but it doesn't matter because it's double check. So king moves to e8, and now just a wonderful finishing blow here. Bishop to d7 with check, and again, this rook move to d1 is paying dividends. The rook is protecting the bishop on d7. The king only has 2 squares to move to. Here the king moves to f8, and now the finishing touch, just to lead to one of the most iconic mating pictures of all time. Bishop takes on e7, and this is finally checkmate. And you can see these two bishops just controlling the back rank, the pawn doing its job, taking away g7, the rook protecting the bishop on d8, not that it matters anymore, and of course the pawn protecting the bishop on e7. So just an amazing combination of moves, and I think what's most amazing is this entire time the queen is just waiting patiently on f3, waiting to deliver checkmate on g2 with the rook, with the bishop, but Anderssen gives Dufresne 0 time. All of these moves came with check. All of them force the king to retreat and eventually deliver this awesome mate. And that's why this game is considered the evergreen game in chess history. So an amazing game. I do want to go back to one point. There is one point in this game right after this rook to d1 move. There is a way to sort of save the game for Dufresne and keep the game going. I'm very glad he didn't play it because I think it's way more fun to have such a cool game and just a way more exciting combination to have. But the move that saves the game for Dufresne is bishop to d4. And this is a really strange-looking move. It's a really strange-looking move. It's a bishop sacrifice, but the idea is that you're blocking the rook on d1. We saw how important this rook on d1 was to deliver discovered check, to protect the bishop on d7, but now you're clogging up the d file, so all those combinations don't work. And here, if you accept the sacrifice, if you take on d4, then you get queen to f3, threatening checkmate. And now you don't have all those amazing combinations because there's a pawn on d4 blocking the rook on the d file, so that doesn't work. So here, here what you have to do, did I show what you have to do? Okay, there's one line I wanted to show. Yeah, okay. So here, let's say you capture the bishop, then you get queen takes on f3 anyways, now you're threatening checkmate, and here you can defend for a bit by playing, you can defend by playing bishop to e4. The rook is protecting the bishop is attacking the queen and protecting the g2 pawn, so you don't have queen to g2 checkmate, but you do have rook to g2 check. And now if the king moves to f1, then queen takes on f2 is checkmate, so you cannot obviously bring the king to f1. Instead, you bring the king to h1, which doesn't look very fun because of this, the queen can have a discovered check of the king. But here you actually can survive with the white pieces. After rook to h2, double check, queen check, and rook check, you can pick up the rook with the king, so rook takes king, queen takes on f2 with check, king goes to h1, and now the knight advances to f5, threatening to come out onto g3 and deliver checkmate with the queen. So here, bishop takes on f5, discovered check from the rook to the black king, but now you can block with the knight on e5. And yes, this comes with check because don't forget about this bishop on b7. We have a wonderful discovered check from the long-range bishop to the king all the way on h1. So you block with the pawn on d5, and now queen picks up the bishop on f5. And that was a very wild combination, but in this position, this is actually, according to the engine, a completely drawn position. The material is almost equal. Both sides have 3 pieces. Anderssen is up the exchange. He has a rook for a knight, but his king is much less safe. He has, it looks like, 1 or 2 pawns less. So the material is basically equal, and this is okay for both sides. I figured I would show that. I'm glad it didn't happen because obviously the ending we got was much cooler, but there was a way to get out of it as late as right after this rook to d1 move. There is a way to survive, put the bishop on d4, and go into that line, and you are fine. But again, glad it didn't happen. Much more happy to have the Evergreen game. Thank you so much for watching. Drop a like, drop a subscribe. Let me know of any other games you'd like me to review, and we'll see you next time.